Do you think it might be using just a bunch of language models like this? Do you think the current transformer-based large language models will take us to AGI?
My main issue is I think that they're quite ugly and brutalist.
Which brutalist? Is that what
Yes.
you said?
Yes, they are basically brute forcing the problem of thought. And by training this thing with looking at instances where people have thought and then trying to deepfake that. And if you have enough data, the deepfake becomes indistinguishable from the actual phenomenon. And in many circumstances, it's going to be identical.
Can you deepfake it till you make it? So can you achieve, what are the limitations of this? I mean, can you reason? Let's use words that are loaded.
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I think that these models are clearly making some inference.
Yeah.
But if you give them a reasoning task, it's often difficult for the experimenters to figure out whether the reasoning is the result of the emulation of the reasoning strategy that they saw in human written text, or whether it's something that the system was able to infer by itself. On the other hand, if you think of human reasoning, if you want to become a very good reasoner, you don't do this by just figuring out yourself. You read about reasoning. And the first people who tried to write about reasoning and reflect on it didn't get it right. Like even Aristotle, who thought about this very hard and came up with a theory of how syllogisms works and syllogistic reasoning, has mistakes in his attempt to build something like a formal logic and gets maybe 80% right. And the people that are talking about reasoning professionally today read Tarski and Frege and built on their work. So in many ways, people, when they perform reasoning, are emulating what other people wrote about reasoning, right? So that it's difficult to really draw this boundary. And when François Chollet says that these models are only interpolating between what they saw and what other people are doing, well, if you give them all the latent dimensions of that can be extracted from the internet, what's missing? Maybe there is almost everything there. And if you're not sufficiently informed by these dimensions and you need more, I think it's not difficult to increase the temperature in the large language model to the point that is producing stuff that is maybe 90% nonsense and 10% viable, and combine this with some prover that is trying to filter out the viable parts from the nonsense in the same way as our own thinking works, right? When we're very creative, we increase the temperature in our own mind and we create hypothetical universes and solutions, most of which will not work. And then we test. And we test by building a core that is internally coherent. And we use reasoning strategies that use some axiomatic consistency by which we can identify those strategies and thoughts and sub-universes that are viable and that can expand our thinking. So if you look at the language models, they have clear limitations right now. One of them is they're not coupled to the world in real time in the way in which our nervous systems are. So it's difficult for them to observe themselves in the universe and to observe what kind of universe they're in. Second, they don't do real-time learnings. They basically get only trained with algorithms that rely on the data being available in batches. So it can be parallelized and runs efficiently on the network and so on. And real-time learning would be very slow so far and inefficient. That's clearly something that our nervous systems can do to some degree. And there is a problem with these models being coherent. And I suspect that all these problems are solvable without a technological revolution. We don't need fundamentally new algorithms to change that. For instance, you can enlarge the context window and thereby basically create working memory in which you train everything that happens during the day. And if that is not sufficient, you add a database and you write some clever mechanisms that the system learns to use to swap out in and out stuff from its prompt context, right? And if that is not sufficient, if your database is full in the evening, overnight you just train. If the system is going to sleep and dream and is going to train the stuff from its database into the larger model by fine-tuning it, building additional layers and so on. And then the next day it starts with a fresh database in the morning with fresh eyes, has integrated all this stuff. And, when you talk to people and you have strong disagreements about something, which means that in their mind they have a faulty belief or you have a faulty belief with a lot of dependencies on it, very often you will not achieve agreement in one session, but you need to sleep about this once or multiple times before you have integrated all these necessary changes in your mind. So maybe it's already somewhat similar.